This beginning starts with an end. Some very big things are ending, and some big things are starting. Whenever I'm in London, I go to the British Museum. Like all museums of this kind, it is an astonishing exhibition of how things change. What kind of things? Things like who human beings are, but also what we are. If you walk through the galleries of the museum, you will discover the enormous range of assumptions we've held over the years about these issues. This label sits at the entrance to a room that represents the founding days of the British Museum. The Enlightenment is a name given to a period of discovery and learning that flourished among Europeans and Americans, changing the way they viewed the world. We're still here, still believing in the views about the world and ourselves that were developed during this time period. Things like what we are and what is the nature of reality change because they're based on ideas and conventions. Architecture is a convention. It's a human construct that organizes our relationship to weather, to each other, to society, etc. Just like money, wind, or the number 4. All these things are real, they certainly exist, but their definitions and boundaries are only fixed by convention. Like many other concepts, they might one day find themselves behind the glass at the British Museum. At the height of their power, these concepts don't just appear invincible, they are invisible. And because they both include and exclude things, they can turn the course of history into particular directions. Now, being wrong about a category wind might not have severe consequences, at least not that we can tell, but being wrong about other conventions and beliefs might. I will name 2. A concept we've been living by since the start of the Enlightenment. The idea that the planet is so large and resourceful, there is always more. Mentally, the Western civilization still lives in the mentality on display at the British Museum. There is always more, somewhere, and we're going to find it and get it. But what if there is no more? And even more subversely, what if it's not ours to get it, but that's a talk for another day? A second dangerous concept we've been living by, that we rational beings have a subject-object relationship to the world. In other words, that the mind is in the brain. This is very much connected to my point earlier. This way of thinking conveniently separates us from the environment, that is something external to us that we control. Most of modern life actually consists of sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day at best, doing what we call thinking. But this way of conceiving of what we are, what we do, and how we do it has at last gotten an inventory number, and it's going behind the glass at the British Museum. Why? Because theories of embodied cognition, like those proposed over half a century ago by people like Francisco Varela, George Lakoff, and Mark Johnson, have been receiving in the past 10 to 15 years massive backing from cognitive science and neuroscience. So go figure, these people were right. The mind is not in the brain. We do, quote, lay down a path in walking. Cognition is extended to the environment. We think in motion and as moving bodies, and we think only in relationship to an environment. This is meant very literally and not metaphorically. Unfortunately, I do not have the time today to go into the actual research, but I do urge you all to check it out. What did the previous, but still very much present way of thinking about thinking did to architecture? It conceptualized it as a static, abstract concept to be inhabited by creatures that live in a fully formed reality. Current architecture is not conceptualized for living bodies in a dynamic and temporal relationship to reality, but for passive bodies that have conquered time and space and now sit and think. This illustration is actually not coincidentally the cover for The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics and Society by Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics. But luckily for us, when things end, things also start. One thing that is relevant for where this talk is going, and I promise it is going somewhere, humanity has invented immersive synthetic space. This allows us to create alternative realities we can populate and move in, i.e., we can take embodied action in. This is fundamentally different from the synthetic 3D space of the computer screen, because this taking of embodied action in means that we feel we are there. For the first time in history, space is also now, through technology like VR, decoupled from traditional materiality. What is space without it, and how do we design for the new materiality? This is, however, a talk for another day. So what are the opportunities at the intersection of these things, some ending and some just beginning? For us at NUMENA, it's an opportunity to think differently about architecture, literally. We have been working on a tool in VR that explores design at one-to-one scale, that alters the cognitive process during the early phases of design. Simply put, we found ourselves making different design decisions at one-to-one. And we believe that this will lead to designs that look and function fundamentally different. For us, this is a paradigmatic shift from an architectural object that is passive and dead in its cold abstraction to spaces that reflect a dynamic relationship with the thinking process of human beings. And the first step in getting there is to start building tools that could get us there. The full version of the kind of thing we've been working on is not ready for prime time yet, but here is a glimpse of the type of explorations we've been doing. We've been placing people in very simple volumes and asking them to draw them. In many cases, they could not. There is a very interesting gap between embodied perception and our rationalizing power. Although the volumes we've been placing people in some cases have been extremely simple, the people could not rationalize them. They just simply could not draw the plans. This observation has led to the core principle of our workflow in this VR tool. Give the designer the one-to-one view and a scaled-down view simultaneously and observe what decisions they make at what scale. In this image, you see what we call the sandbox. So we basically rendered the entire scene 2 times. It took us a while to figure out how to do that and get that running on a Quest device, a standalone device. And we basically have a methodology at this point where we can predict what kind of decisions a designer will make at one-to-one scale, so choose to actually move things and transform things at one-to-one, and what kind of things will be done simultaneously at a scale-down scale. So we're basically merging a phenomenological approach to design to the God's perspective that gives you a rational understanding of the scene at all times. While we're dealing with this very intense research, design and software development process, where we're both the coders, the architects, and the guinea pigs, we're using a simplified version of this tool for actual architecture projects. And what you see here is from an actual project. We are actually asking clients to design parts of their own buildings, to design things themselves. Because of the low level of abstraction when it comes to the representation of space in VR, their level of understanding is exponentially wider compared to showing them traditional drawings. It is also vital for us that clients take action, that they don't just look at things and move, but that they actually move and change elements that they're able to understand by themselves. This unprecedented level of agency we give clients has completely transformed our relationship to them and our entire workflow in the concept phase. Before showing you a little bit of what that actually looks like, a few very brief words about who we actually are at NUMENA. We are coding architects, taking on both quote-unquote traditional architecture projects, more of an opportunity for us to test our tool. And we've been venturing into the AR and VR space by taking over projects there as well. The point of that is to basically flex our coding and UX muscles. These are images from a large space for collaborations we have designed for a German VR office platform. This is a training app for a medical company where we have designed an entire hospital for them and applied concepts of embodied cognition to help their people learn certain things faster. And we're even working right now with museums doing AR apps for them that transform the space of exhibitions. This is actually a full-blown game that we've made here. It's an AR game with ARG elements. We have been perhaps surprisingly quite good at it. This year, for example, is the third time one of our medical simulators is getting a nomination at the International VR Awards here in London. So let's say for a bunch of architects, we've been competing and sometimes winning against the largest VR development companies. All right, so here is a very short clip showing the client version of what we are developing with this tool. I also have a headset with me, so if any of you is interested in just trying it out, I'll be happy to give you a peek into exactly this project and this scene. Thank you so much.
Any questions for Andrea? I have one.
Andreea, can you speak a little bit about the challenges of designing this new software and anything unexpected that you thought maybe would be fairly straightforward but is actually turning out to be fairly intensive?
Everything.
Everything.
From the color we should pick for a button to absolutely everything. So it's been quite a ride. It's been forcing us to rethink everything, as I said, from graphic design to architecture to workflows to brains and minds and how they work. Taking on VR projects outside traditional architecture for companies like in the healthcare industry has really helped us understand the virtual space more and has given us opportunities to run things like user testing, because these were things we did not have, we still don't have an opportunity to test and gain experience in within traditional architecture projects. So we've been very strategically picking clients for our traditional architecture projects and clients for our VR and AR projects to build slowly a certain kind of expertise that then feeds into the kind of ideas and UX strategies we put into NUMENA Design, the VR tool.
So how did the client respond after trying your tool, like traditional client architecture?
There are two types of responses. There are people that they need some time to realize that they can design things. So this as a proposition for someone who's not a traditional trained architect is a bit bewildering in the beginning. So that, for some people, that takes a while. Other people get into it immediately, and they kind of have the time of their lives because they have the feeling, well, they've just designed their house. And this is something, let's say, a quote-unquote regular person would have never thought possible because, well, you get an architect to design your house. Of course, what we're proposing is not that anyone can take this tool and then design a house. We're usually there with them. We are going to have a private beta release of the tool for other people to try it. We don't propose that anyone can just design their own things in there, but we're working on a series of steps that can help them. What we do in the office is we basically lock certain things like structural walls that they cannot move, but we give them total freedom in making design decisions with everything that's basically not structural or is not regulated by code.
Quick question, are you planning to round trip back into traditional BIM platforms?
Yeah, so the way we're working right now is we are almost to the point where for us internally, this tool is the only tool we use in concept. But as soon as we exit concept, yes, then we go into traditional BIM platforms with a project. And whether that's the best approach or whether that's going to change in the future, we don't know yet.
You explained really well that you've hit this nugget of compelling truth that designing spaces in one-to-one versus on abstract different things is creates different decisions. From your development, is there anything in terms of the UI and the UX and moving of things that is a good, strong principle to follow that you've learned of the good ways to do things?
So what we have learned, and the reason why I took this philosophical detour with this whole British Museum thing in the beginning, was to communicate the fact that our culture is so removed from these principles of embodied cognition after living for 300 years under Enlightenment and these rationality principles that we have to struggle to think of body and creativity and movement and in those terms. So we're using VR almost as a methodological tool as well, aside from the goals we're trying to achieve. So we're literally putting ourselves in this situation and putting other people, and we're looking to see how do they do things, how do they move their body, how do they move their hands? Do they just go to the little model where it's more comfortable to make decisions, or how do they venture into making embodied decisions? Because again, we don't think all decisions should be embodied. You do need a rational overview of a project, of course. We don't want to build a crazy labyrinth. But we are just in the middle of that exploration and understanding. We're using a lot of research that's happening right now in cognitive science to try to understand, okay, if you move your body in a certain way, what's going on with your thinking? The type of research that I'm referring to specifically is the type of research where scientists would give people a certain cognitive task, and then they ask them to move in a certain way, and then they notice if the decision on that cognitive task is altered or not, and it turns out it is, which is just monumental. So this whole area of research is really taking off, and we are discovering that through VR, it can have monumental impact on how we design and the things that come out of these designs.